We begin with one of the defining issues of our times, the use of artificial intelligence and the risks that it could pose not only to all our jobs, but to democracy itself. People living in democracies are well aware that elections have always involved mudslinging and distorting the truth. But AI threatens to make it a lot harder to recognize what's real and what's not. This danger is already evident in the election campaign taking place in Hungary right now. Incumbent Prime Minister Viktor Orban, one of the European Union's fiercest critics, is trailing in the polls and could be kicked out of office after 16 years in power. Orban has strongly opposed EU aid to Ukraine and is now telling voters that Brussels wants to drag the country into a war, a message he's hammering home with the help of AI.
A little girl weeping, followed by scenes of her father being executed at war. The video ends with a warning that Brussels could make such a nightmare real, urging voters to choose Hungary's ruling Fidesz party. The clip, generated by artificial intelligence and shown without a clear disclaimer, is part of the political arsenal Prime Minister Viktor Orban is deploying as he fights to hold on to power. He has framed the election as a choice between war and peace, claiming that a change of power would drag Hungary into the Ukraine conflict under EU pressure. Facing his toughest electoral challenge in 16 years, Orban doubled down on his claims in his opening campaign speech.
I want to tell you that the war can come a lot quicker than you think. We must stop it now. Once it's out of the bag, it can't be stopped. If you put your foot in, you can't step back. You must keep out of the war from the very beginning.
Polls show nearly half of Hungarians want a change of government. The country's economy is stagnating. Public services, from healthcare to transport, are widely seen as neglected. Opposition challenger Peter Magyar has been warning voters about Fidesz's tactics, while stressing that his party Tisza can make everyday life better.
The reason why they are trying to attack us, to discredit us, is that they know that we have all it takes for victory. We have majority support, that's the main thing. We have the credible candidates. We have our program. We have our experts. In one word, we are ready. My dear friends, Tisza is ready for governing.
Fidesz has frequently used AI-generated images, sometimes labeled and sometimes not. But it isn't unique to Hungary. Across Europe, far-right parties are increasingly turning to generative AI to push their messages.
And for more on this, let's bring in DW correspondent Ferenc Gaal, who is following these elections from Brussels. Ferenc, how is this election being seen in Brussels?
I think it's fair to say that it's being watched very closely here in Brussels, not only because Viktor Orban is one of the EU's longest-serving leader with his 16 years in office, but also because he is such a disrupting force in the EU, blocking important decisions. He has done that for years now, and that has damaged not only the EU's external perception, but also its ability to act coherently. Now, the Commission doesn't comment on ongoing election campaigns, but what you hear and what you see here is that they are really trying to keep confrontation with Orban to a minimum in order to not feed into his anti-EU narratives and in order to not give him a chance to portray him as kind of the sole protector of national sovereignty against supposedly evil Brussels bureaucrats. So they're trying to, stay out of this as much as possible, probably hoping, of course, that maybe with an election there will be a change that sees Hungary with a government that might be easier to cooperate with, but they're staying as much as possible out of this. But Orban, of course, is not making this easy because he certainly has not dialed down his anti-EU and anti-Ukraine rhetoric in the campaign.
Now, the latest polls show Orban is on the back foot at home, so he has gone on the attack, focusing mainly on the EU and on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Is this successful?
It is difficult to say because the polls are kind of showing a very consistent at least the polls that are considered reliable and independent, are showing a fairly consistent lead for the opposition TISA party. But if you look at other polls that, for example, look into what people think about Hungary's relation or like Hungary's position with the war in neighboring Ukraine, it's interesting that there was a recent poll, for example, showing that almost a quarter of Hungarians are actually worried that if the opposition party wins, Hungary might be dragged into this war. And another 23% are at least unsure whether this could happen. So that, of course, is a potential for Fidesz that they could mobilize, that could play in their favor, as they are trying to portray themselves as the force of peace and are trying to stoke fears that the opposition party would drag Hungary into the war. So there is definitely some potential for, to win votes for Fidesz in this whole rhetoric.
Now, he is also portraying his main opponent, Peter Magyar, as a pro-EU or pro-Ukrainian candidate. Is that so? How pro-EU is Magyar really?
It's interesting. It's kind of ambivalent because obviously, from what we can see now at least, he is much more pro-EU than the current government. His party manifesto says that they want to strengthen Hungary's position in the EU and in NATO. They want to get the country on track to eventually join the Eurozone. So this is all much more, cooperative towards Brussels. But at the same time, they're treading a fine line, and they don't want to be. They don't want to play into Orban's narrative of them being a Brussels puppet or being too Brussels friendly. So a case in point is their position on Ukraine. They have said they would recognize Moscow as the aggressor immediately. They would also support any EU efforts towards a ceasefire. But they've been very clear that they do not support an accelerated accession process for Ukraine. And also, they would not immediately sever ties with Russia. So it is ambiguous. They're trying to project, they want to be seen as the force that brings a change in Hungary, but they also want to convey a sense of stability and that they will not cause too much disruption.
Now, Orban's campaign rests on the boast that he has tailwind from Washington and good relations with Russia and China. Is that believable? How's that playing out among Hungarian voters?
Yes, so it's definitely a major aspect of Fidesz's campaign because this is an area of politics where they have a huge advantage, of course, with their experience, with their years in government, and they are the ones currently in power, so they can internationally represent Hungary, and they're trying to play onto this. Now, what we know, usually voters are more concerned with domestic issues like rising cost of living, like the state of healthcare, the state of education, all of which have been very high on the agenda domestically in Hungary, and a lot of people are not very happy with Fidesz's record on that. But Fidesz is also trying to make this connection between their good relations with international powers and how these can potentially bring a benefit domestically. So they are obviously, the Russian case is one of the most prominent ones, where they are saying, of course, that the good relationship with Russia that they have is allowing them to buy cheap Russian oil, and that is beneficial for Hungarian consumers, while if you look at it closely, it's not that simple, because at the pump, actually, Hungarians are not paying less for gas than people in neighboring countries, even though Hungary does get this cheaper Russian oil. So it's not that simple, and it's also not very clear how exactly this will translate into votes for them, but it's also very likely not going to hurt them.
Now let's come back to what we've seen earlier, the impact that we can expect from these AI-generated images and videos. Do you think voters are being convinced by this?
It's also difficult to foresee, of course, and it's hard to see this clear cause and effect between, AI-generated content flooding social media and then certain electoral outcomes. What is clear that Fidesz is definitely heavily using AI-generated content, not always or very often not complying with rules about, or not clearly labeling it as such. And even if it doesn't have this clear impact, it might be more subtle in the way that it contributes to more polarization, to more insecurity, for people. that they feel they can't trust the media anymore. And also that is something that ultimately then political parties can weaponize. So it's hard to say what the clear impact will be, but it's definitely an issue that is very present in this campaign. And of course, the EU has tried to rein this in with the AI Act, the Digital Services Act, but it's not very clear how this will actually work, because a lot of it is also left to the platforms. And we've seen in the past that there will always be loopholes that then political actors can exploit and have exploited in the past.
VW correspondent Ferenc Gaal there reporting from Brussels. Thank you very much, Ferenc. I'm now joined by Samuel Woolley. He's the chair of disinformation studies at the University of Pittsburgh. Now, how effective is a video like the one we just saw in our report there?
These videos are very effective at pulling on the emotions of viewers. They are purposefully designed and deployed to be persuasive. They are the newest form of propaganda, or if you like, a new type of computational propaganda.
Now, how big an issue is it that this video was not labeled as AI-generated content when published?
This is a serious issue. At a basic level, people in liberal democracies have the right to know when they are being shown falsified images, or they have the right to know who is attempting to manipulate public opinion and why. In this case, there's a lack of transparency, and that suggests that the person behind it has something to hide. And indeed, when you're using images that are fake, you probably do want to hide. It's not something that one should be proud of. It's actually an attempt to mislead voters and to manipulate public opinion.
Now, political misinformation has been around, well, forever, I guess. How has AI changed that particular game?
AI has put political misinformation on steroids. Really, what it's done is it's made it so that those that produce propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation, this purposeful spread of false content, it allows them to massively amplify their efforts. It allows them to do so relatively cheaply and quickly, and with content that can oftentimes be very micro-targeted to particular groups of users in ways that we've never seen before.
What forms of political misinformation enabled by artificial intelligence worry you the most?
Well, I think that we should be very concerned about deepfake videos. I think more generally, the content that's created by generative AI is very useful at populating propaganda messages, as I said earlier, in a way that can micro-target particular communities. Whereas before, most of the propaganda that we've seen circulate on mediums like social media and indeed TV and radio before them was very broad. The idea was to strike at the emotions of a broad swath of the public. Today, with generative AI, you can be very persuasive on a very granular level with specific subsections of the population, and this has serious implications for the outcomes of elections, for crises, for disasters. And we see a lot of groups around the world using these tools towards these ends.
Now, from what you've seen in the past few years, you've just touched upon this, how tangible has the use of AI been when it comes to electoral consequences? Is there any data on that?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of data on it. In 2024, we had a super year of elections, and there was a lot of use of AI then. Last year in 2025, then Irish presidential candidate Catherine Connolly was depicted in a fake video showing her allegedly saying that she was pulling out of the race. She was not pulling out of the race. This happened just days before the race was set to happen. This could have had serious implications. She had momentum. She ended up winning, but you could imagine what the implications could have been. In Germany, the AfD candidate for chancellor last year, Alice Weidel, also made use of AI videos to pull at the heartstrings of people, to claim that people should remember what Germany used to look like, but all the images that were being shown were AI-generated images. They weren't actually Germany. They were a fake version of Germany meant to make people feel emotional, meant to make people feel nostalgic, and to manipulate people.
Now, how can regulators or watchdogs audit AI-driven political content?
We touched on this earlier. I think one of the main things that we need to have is transparency around whether or not political groups and other, indeed commercial groups, are leveraging these kinds of tools. But social media firms and the groups that build these AI-generated mechanisms have to open up their algorithms in some way, shape, or form to governments and third-party researchers so that they can analyze the way these algorithms work, whether or not they contain advertisements from malicious groups, and whether or not they are doing things that are underhanded and potentially against the law.
Are there currently regulatory blind spots, and which worry you the most when it comes to AI in political campaigning?
You know, the EU is attempting to catch up. Countries like Germany are attempting to catch up to AI, but AI is quite a big force at the moment. It's speeding along, and it's difficult for legislators to know how to do things like watermark AI images in a way that can't be circumvented. We desperately need technologists' help, public interest technologists, in generating law to think through how to prevent the worst malicious uses of artificial intelligence, particularly for the purposes of things like authoritarianism or for manipulation during crises and disasters, because we're seeing this happen a lot, and we're not seeing regulation keep a pace with it.
Now, how do you see political campaigning being influenced by this in the future?
I think that this is going to become a tool that is used by any and every political campaign if they're allowed to use it. I think that it will depend upon the morals and ethics of the particular campaign, whether or not they deploy it in a way that is misleading, as we've seen. And that's a problem. We need regulation that actually prevents these kinds of decisions from being only in the hands of a party. We should not allow them to simply lie or spread hate speech or slander or other kinds of sensational content, and not, at the very least, not label that it's coming from AI, but potentially not at all, depending on the law in the country.
Now, talking about labeling, but things are not labeled right now. You know, as a bit of service for our viewers, how can I spot AI fake videos? Are there one or two points that I could watch out for?
It's incredibly challenging. It used to be that you could look at things like the eyes. There wouldn't be a lot of blinking happening. So on an AI-generated video, the person put in the video would not blink their eyes like this. But now there's been fixes to make that possible. You can look for sort of disjointedness. You can look for problems with things like people's ears or their appendages. You can look for things that seem out of place, limbs that seem misshapen. But increasingly, with the sophistication of this technology, as it continues to progress, it's getting harder and harder to actually detect this. And we need hardware-driven solutions in order to come up with ways to effectively watermark these images before they become manipulated.
Until then, 6 fingers on a hand is always a giveaway. Thank you very much. Samuel Woolley there, Associate Professor at the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you.